Hello, everyone. We are so happy and so privileged to be able to have this group of elite nonprofit business experts to present to you today. We are doing this in the midst of challenges known and unknown, having a little technical difficulty this morning, but nonetheless, we will prevail, and we are here to bring you a lot of good content. Our hope is that if you are a new business owner interested in starting a nonprofit entity, if you are a current nonprofit leader looking at scaling up your business, that we will provide you the information to know how to start it right and to keep it right. So this is all about the business of starting a nonprofit. We have great business minds on the line today that's going to present this information, and I'm going to let my coworker, my sister, my friend, Sharon Francis, make some of the introductions of the people that she knows very well.
Good morning, everyone. And certainly we do thank you for joining us today on our webinar. I don't know if I'm getting feedback. Is everybody okay with what you're hearing? Okay, great. We have with us three of my dear friends that are distinguished colleagues in the nonprofit arena. I came from the nonprofit arena before I came to the Minority Business Assistance Center, and for many years, and I've had the opportunity to work with each one of them. And so we're glad to have with us Donald Wells, who's the president or the CEO of Wells and Associates. He's a CPA and very distinguished gentleman that works with many of the nonprofits here in Columbus, Ohio, and wealth of information. And I'm sure he's going to tell you, you will get to hear from him yourself. And then we also have contact information after the webinar is over so that you can take advantage of some of the social media presentations that he does have available that can be of assistance to you. We also have Leela Boykin, and she is the grande dame of nonprofits, certainly in the Columbus community. She's been here for over 40 years working in social services and also working with nonprofits. You'll see her bio as has been scrolling through, but she's definitely a jewel, and we're glad to have her on this panel. She's a consultant for nonprofits and helps those that are trying to start up. So certainly if that's your position, I think that she would be of definite benefit to reach out to. So we're glad to have her today. We also have Stephen Torcell, who is the executive director of Homes on the Hill CDC, one of the premier CDCs that has been operating here in Columbus, as well as in the state of Ohio. Has been recognized for their work in home ownership, development, homebuyer counseling, and he is well knowledgeable about the nonprofit arena, particularly as it refers to community development and building relationships, collaborations with other entities, working with city and county government. So we've got you some good people that are on our panel today, and hopefully we'll be able to shed some light for those who are considering starting a nonprofit or on the fence, trying to decide whether it's the right move to take. We want to make sure that you have the information that you need to make an informed decision. And for those who already are in the nonprofit arena, we want to make sure that we are doing things properly. And there's a lot of things that it entails as far as starting a nonprofit. So you're going to hear from the panel from their various perspectives. So I'm going to turn it back over to Janine, and we'll just go from there. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Sharon. Listen, guys, the question that's on everybody's mind with the economic issues, the pandemic, the social justice issues, people are believing and feeling, and rightfully so, that there should be more social service agencies out there, that nonprofits have a bigger role to play in the community. So let's just kick it off with getting that fundamental explanation of, can you explain how one goes about establishing a nonprofit and walk us from setting up the legal structure, to a point to where you know that you can now operate according to the mission that you have. Donald, I'm gonna pitch that one to you because I think that's a great place for you to start.
No, that's super, and I really appreciate the Urban League. I'm getting feedback.
That's me.
A little bit.
I appreciate the Urban League putting this together. This first and foremost, and we'll talk a lot about this, is that we're going to go past the point of a business plan, and we're going to assume that you already know that yes, you want to start a nonprofit. The steps are very sequential. The very first thing that you have to do is you have to go to the Secretary of State of Ohio, make sure that the name that you want you can use. Then you need to apply for and obtain a EIN number, employee identification number. Then the most difficult part is the filing of something called a Form 1023 with the Internal Revenue Service, so that you are considered a tax-exempt organization. People make the mistake that believing that when they register with the Secretary of State as a nonprofit, that they are tax-exempt, and that is not the case. Once you go through the application with the Internal Revenue Service, then there's one more state that you need to circle back to, and that's with the Attorney General's office. Register with them as a public charity. So it's 3 steps. And so far this year, I've probably helped 3 organizations go through it. And the steps will sometimes take as long as 18 months. Sometimes the steps will take as little as 4 months. So it just depends on the complexity in the application process.
Fantastic. And I know that, I mean, starting a business is very similar. You've got to register with Secretary of State. You've got to get that EIN. I do want to reach back to that what you glossed over a bit was the business plan, only because I am a business planning superwoman. And I believe that without that, businesses can lose their way. And I think even more so in the nonprofit arena, because a nonprofit is about a mission focus. Right? So being able to clearly articulate and state and share that mission, not only with the people that you're serving, but with those people that you're trying to bring on board to help with the service. Can we talk a little bit about who you want to surround yourself with to help move that mission forward? Leela, what about you? What are your
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics because I've had to assist some startup nonprofits not bring their friends on the board.
Could you repeat that?
Yes. Nonprofits want to bring their friends on the board who are nice people, but they don't have the skill sets that are required to move that organization forward. So one of the very, very important board member skill sets is having someone at least, and I always recommend an accountant because it's important to manage the money of the organization correctly. So I've had people say, well, I hurt my friend's feelings. And I said, what you can do to keep your friend involved is just use your friends as an advisor. But they don't participate in the governance of the organization. And that's one thing we have to learn, how to govern our organization. And just getting back to the whole point of having a business plan, you have to have a plan to show how you want to grow your organization. Because you just can't stop with, I'm started now, I'm going to go to work, people are going to give me money. But what's the plan for your continued existence? And you need board people who understand that and will work with you to make that happen. So that's one of my favorite things. And the other one is this: understand that when you become a nonprofit, you are serving the public good through your mission. And some people don't look at it this way, but nonprofits become a part of the fabric of leadership in the community, which is a very important position for a nonprofit to have. So you have to do what you say you're going to do.
One thing that she's talking about right there with the board and not bringing your friends onto it, it becomes very important. And even this week, I'm having conversations with individuals where they don't quite understand that you can start a nonprofit, but once you put a board in place, you work at the pleasure of the board.
Exactly.
It's not a for-profit business that you're in charge. If the board decides to change the mission and the direction, they vote and they execute that, then that's what's going to happen. So that's a very touchy subject for people as they start these nonprofits, is that, hey, you know what, I have this vision, I want to go do it. And the unfortunate thing is that today we have still a lot of nonprofits functioning that way without that board oversight. And our Attorney General is aggressively seeking to create penalties for those organizations.
And I'm so glad that we're talking about boards, or at least getting into that conversation. And that could be a completely separate webinar, right? There's board training and board development programs within the city, but I feel like that's still something that needs to be well understood, because not only is a board becoming the operating and deciding entity of the nonprofit, there is a financial, a money, a fiscal fiduciary responsibility that goes along with that, right? So, and in serving the people and the public through your mission and becoming a leader in the community and doing that, you want to make sure that all of your financial operations are above reproach, correct?
Correct.
Sharon, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on what would you think would be an ideal makeup of your first contingent or first board people positions?
Well, absolutely. First of all, understanding whatever your mission is and the area that you're going to serve, I think that's, first of all, knowing who your target audience is going to be. That's going to help influence the people that you get on your board, because obviously you want people that are knowledgeable of, like if you're serving a particular neighborhood, you may look for representation from that neighborhood. If you're looking to serve, say you're doing education, then you want people that are involved in the educational arena. The core components that you need to have, whether you have them on a board or if you engage them for their services, but you definitely want to have the legal person, because as a nonprofit, there are many requirements, not only that you're going to have to meet as far as the Attorney General is concerned, but your funders, you're going to be dealing with contracts and agreements, expectations of your organization, and you definitely want to have someone that is knowledgeable of contract law, that's also knowledgeable of what the funder requirements are going to be, so that you can make sure that you stay compliant and there are no repercussions, because oftentimes people think, well, it's a nonprofit, so even as a board, I may not have any liability. Well, you need to have insurance for your directors, because if for any reason there is liability that blows back on your board, it's important to have that for your directors and officers as well. Definitely, I think Leela already spoke about the accounting and auditing, because typically if you're going to be receiving funding from any of your governmental agencies, most of them are going to require that you have an audit, and they'll tell you what kind of audit that they're going to require. So when you're talking to an experienced auditor, they should be able to tell you if they can provide that, or if not, where you can get it. And then Also, for your organization to continue, you're going to have a consistent source of income and revenue in order to operate. A lot of times people are mistaken when they're thinking that as a nonprofit, that means that I can't make a profit in what I'm doing. And this is often a misconception that people have, and it causes the downfall of the organization because it can't sustain itself. So you have to be able to have someone, if not yourself, or someone that's on your board, or someone that you hire, that is able to continue to identify funding sources. You may get a grant for your program or a project for this particular year or for a couple of years, but then after that, it's gone. You got to have another source that you're going to have to be able to have to fill in those gaps. The other thing, and this is one of the reasons that I thought Leela would be helpful to this webinar, is that many nonprofits are looking for alternative sources of revenue that may not necessarily be tax exempt, but they are income generating revenue in order to support your mission. You have to be able to make a profit as a nonprofit if you're going to survive. Okay, so that is one of the areas. Leela, as a matter of fact, if you wouldn't mind chiming in, talking about your experience with the Subway franchise.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Sharon, because having someone who is an astute fundraiser on your board is really so important. The neighborhood house got a Subway franchise. In order to do that, the nonprofit Neighborhood House Inc. had to have a separate board for that social enterprise. And there were individuals on that board who knew about fundraising, who knew about franchising, so that they could operate, to were able to hire people and pay them. However, the Inc., the neighborhood house, was able to share in some of the profits from that franchise to help grow that entity. And that's what you want to do. So, you know, it's very clear, and I'm sure Don can give you some really good tips on doing that. But the key is not to mix the boards so that there is no conflict of interest, all right? And you are compliant as a, quote, social enterprise, down to all of the accounting, the auditing, everything. So when people think a nonprofit cannot make a profit, generally we don't call it a profit, we call it a surplus, okay?
Yes.
You can do that, you can do that. So, you know, as you're thinking about setting up your nonprofit and really working out your fundraising plan for the survival of your nonprofit, you might want to think about what business entity, for-profit business entity, can we form to help support the mission, the goals and objectives of the nonprofit. Perfectly fine.
Awesome. Well, I was trying to save the money discussion till the end, but y'all just taking me there. So let's just go there, right?
Right.
Where should one I have my business plan, I'm legally structured, got my 501c3, I've got my board members identified. Now it's time to go for the money. As a startup, where should I go, guys? And we haven't heard from Stephen yet. So I'm sure he can weigh in on this. Stephen, can we hear your voice and your answer, and then we can just kind of roll it around? Stephen, are you there?
May need to unmute his mic.
May need to unmute. Well, while he's getting his audio together, I'm going to pitch this over to Mr. Wells. Talk to me about the money, sir.
And the money is phenomenal. Okay, so here we go. And even as an accountant, man, I do a ton of speaking on this. So I'm going to spit up over you real quick and just dump a lot of information. In the United States, individuals give about $1,800 a year. All right. So your friends are not going to give enough money to support your mission. We work really hard at getting money from foundations and things of that nature. We spend more time, if you look at an executive director's time, they spend more time than they benefit from that. That is a source. The other sources become grants and things like that, and those are good. But Ms. Boykin just talked about it. The wave of the future of fundraising has got to become affiliate type programs. And you, as a nonprofit, I looked at the attendees. There's one of my dear friends who's in attendance who writes extremely well. As a nonprofit, if you cannot tell a clear, concise, a compelling story, there's not a lot that people are going to be able to do for you. So sources of money, obviously individuals, foundations, grants, but then the other source that people miss are affiliate programs. The Ronald McDonald House, 60% of their annual budget comes from the coin boxes at the McDonald's drive-thru. 60% of their annual budget. We step over pennies trying to get the big hit, and we're just not successful enough. We've got to figure out how to accumulate a whole bunch of pennies.
Very good point. And that sounds like a whole other webinar.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
Could
So
I just make some comments?
please let me hear from you in the chat box. If there are spin-off subjects that you want us to come back together and provide for you, let us know what those are in the chat section, and we'll be sure to reconvene and bring you that information. So here's a question that I get, because I am a for-profit business advisor. I believe in making money. If I'm going into business, I'm gonna make some money. So there's a struggle between, I have this mission and I want to do good and I want to help people, but maybe I should be a for-profit or a nonprofit. Can you guys talk about where there may be like a deciding moment and in which direction to go? And I'm gonna just pitch that to the group. Anyone that wants to take that one, because that's a lot to unpack.
Well, for me, it's easy. As I meet people walk into my office and say, "Hey, Don, I want to start a nonprofit," even though 95% of my business is nonprofit work, even though I touch about 80 to 90 nonprofits a year, my very first action is to try and talk them out of it. Because what I want to hear is, from a business plan standpoint, why. I want to do social good. Okay, that's not a good enough reason to start a nonprofit. It really boils down to me to your planned revenue stream. If your planned revenue stream is grants, most organizations will not make grants to for-profit entities. So anything other than, as I talk to people, if they can't narrow me down into that, we're really talking about a for-profit exercise.
Very good. What about you, Leela? You want to weigh in?
I concur, and I've talked to many people who really think that the nonprofit can survive through grants and donations. So you have to understand that a nonprofit is a business, and you want to handle that business so that you will have a life after your startup. So it's very important. It's very important to plan for the next 3 to 5 years how we're going to sustain this organization. And there's nothing wrong with making money. Is that correct, Mr. Wells?
That is absolutely correct.
You cannot write a compelling story saying this is the need, this is the good that I want to do, and not have the dollars to do the work that's required in order to achieve those goals and objectives. You just can't do it. So there's nothing dirty about making a profit.
Mhm.
Just under the nonprofit structure, you structure it correctly.
Okay.
And also, if I can chime in on this, I think that often, particularly for startup organizations where they really don't have a dedicated source of revenue, or they're trying to get funding through various funding sources, often we overlook the opportunities that may be there to partner with others that are doing similar to what you're doing. Because, you know, often to get your feet wet, if you can find someone that is doing or similar to what you're interested in doing, that's already established themselves, often, and one thing about the nonprofit world, people recognize that if you've got a good mission and you've got the heart of really wanting to serve, we do help each other. We do help each other, because this is heart work. This is not just I'm out trying to make a buck work. You believe in what that mission is,
Yeah.
and when you see people that have like passion, you want to help. And so I think that you know, as in any business venture, you're looking at to see what is the need. Now, if you know, if you've got a particular service that you're trying to provide, and there are 50 other nonprofits that are doing the same thing, well, the chances of you being able to get a piece of that pie may be slim to none.
Ooh, yeah.
So you really want to look at what areas are missing. Can you find a niche? Say, for instance, you know, you wanting to improve your neighborhood. Well, is there anybody working in your neighborhood that's doing improvement? You know, the very first thing that our nonprofit did when we got the vision to serve our community around our church was we went to the city to find out, okay, well, what's planned for our area? Is there anybody that's working in our area? And at the time, there really were no players. But once we got involved, then other players did come, and guess what? They came and you know, talked to us. You know, and so that they could find out, okay, so how do I fit within this whole plan, so that you don't have duplications of efforts, and you certainly don't want to have to be competing against each other for a very small pot of, you know, funds that may be available. But the opportunity to partner with those who are, you know, doing the same work, even if they're not in your area, if they have that expertise and you can tap. They'll be a great resource for you, even to direct you to opportunities and resources that may be available. So definitely you want to open yourself up, find out who's, you know, playing it, you know, in the game, so that you can take advantage, and hopefully you all can work out a good relationship and you can benefit.
I'm taking a ton of notes. I hope everybody else is too. Sharon, you just dropped so many golden nuggets on that one. And I don't want to lose it because, you know, my mind can go in 3 different directions at once. It is competing for that's finite pot of money, right?
Yes.
So we want to set that to the side and come back and revisit it. But then I also am want to go from passive to active, kind of, how do I put in action? If there's a gap in services in my community, I'm not ready to start my own nonprofit. How can I get involved? How can I be part of that? How can I make a pitch and say, this is something I want to do? And by the way, will you write me into your budget, right? Because it comes down to the money. Help me understand that.
So the way I see it, there's probably more than two. There's really 2 ways to jump in. And if you have a sustainable concept, an idea, and Ms. Boykins talked about fundraising money, you have a compelling discussion to take to another organization and say, hey, I'd like to bring this program into you, and I can self-fund it, because you're going to have to self-fund it at some point, right?
Yes.
So you walk in the door pitching a program expansion for another organization. And what happens in most cases, is once you get your feet wet and grow, that program gets spun off into its own organization.
That's
So,
good.
so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, and I'll let Ms. Boykin talk about this a lot, is through something called a physical agent or physical sponsorship agreement. In town, I know of 2 organizations that are set up solely to operate in that space. Ms. Boykin, I'll let you talk.
Well, for startups who have similar or compatible missions with an organization that's been operating, I like to get those 2 together to talk about how they can be more impactful by bringing this organization on and teaching this organization how to manage, how to do the documentation, how to use the money to make sure that the money spent are on activities that are directly related to the program. Now, as a matter of fact, I'm working with some organizations now, just going through that process. Why is that important? Because if you're the new kid on the block, okay, the credibility that you need to attract dollars is not there yet. But because you have the understanding that you need to link with somebody who has some experience, that who you can learn from, and as Don said, you can spin off that program into its own. But this requires some patience. But let me talk about the compelling story. One of the things that we have to learn to do if we're going to start a nonprofit is we have to do our research to make sure that we have clearly identified the problem that we're going to address. You just can't say, well, I see all these kids running around the street and they need something to do. Okay, that's true, but then how do you quantify that, and how do you move that into an outcome that you want to achieve? You've got to do the research, and that's an area where many of us are weak. And if you're going to work with a fiscal agent, the first question that you usually ask is, well, how do you know this is a problem? And you've got to be able to answer that. And that takes you back to the research. So take the time to do the research so that you know what you're talking about. I have one organization that says, well, in our neighborhood, we got a lot of vacant houses. And my question was, how many? Well, I don't know, but it's a lot. Okay. So if you want me to help you get rid of the vacant houses, then I need to know what the scope of that work is, and who owns them, and what has the city done about that. So we have to learn to be very clear, do our homework, so that we present ourselves as a competent, confident entity who really understands about doing the work and achieving the outcomes.
Ms. Boykin has said several things there, and I looked at the attendees list. We have some mature organizations that are attending, and I want to speak real quickly to them under this topic also, because in Franklin County, we know that we have too many nonprofit organizations. The number, you can hear anywhere between 10 and 15,000 within the surrounding area of Franklin County. So we know we have too many. We also know that the major funders in town don't like the number of nonprofits that we have. So as a mature organization, I'm constantly stressing to them, you have board members that work at Cardinal Health. You have board members that work at Nationwide. You have board members that work at organizations that do mergers and acquisitions. As a mature organization, part of your research may not be on the systemic issue in your community. It may be who is available, what assets exist where we can approach them about joining. Don't always look for the small person to approach you. I have several clients in the art area in town, and it kind of blows my mind how many art organizations we have that are running very small theater groups. If we would put all those art organizations under one umbrella, the arts would then have a larger void in our community regarding a budget, right? Instead, everybody is fighting over this small pool. And I think that that's the other piece of research and strategy that we need to do as we start to think about financing our operation, not only as a new organization, but as a mature organization. If you're on this call right now and you're not expecting your numbers to be cut next year, and you're not planning on how you're going to deal with those cuts, your board is letting you down, because we know that everyone is going to take some portion of a cut next year. So how are you going to deal with it? Maybe the way you deal with it is by going out and grabbing another program to bring under your umbrella.
Ooh, child, that's heavy. But I mean, it's very true, and it's very necessary to understand that, and to start to, just have open conversations about maybe we need to look at partnering more and bridging some of those gaps. How do you do that without changing your mission? I think that's a concern, right? How do you bring on people with varying and conflicting visions, but you still are a mission-driven nonprofit? How does that work?
So this is one of the things that I struggle with within the nonprofit arena, because everyone, whenever I meet with an organization, they want to tell me what their website mission is. Their website mission is, strong word, irrelevant. What I want to go to is, what did you tell the IRS your mission was?
Yes.
Right? Because we wordsmith these things every 2 years, we change. None of that stuff matters. It really boils down to, what did you tell the IRS? Now, once we start to look at that as our mission, we don't have this issue of it not being broad enough. What we do is, over time, we continuously try to narrow our mission. In the big picture, most nonprofit organizations, when you go back to say, what did you tell the IRS? Told the IRS social good. That's what you told the IRS. So now we're dealing with egos and other things that have limited our mission. So if we can get back to our original mission, we have plenty of room and space and capacity to do these other things. Now, if your question is, hey, Don, we don't have enough capacity to be in these 7 different lanes, that's a different conversation. What I would say to you is, who's in that lane that you want to be in? Go and build a relationship with that organization.
Well said. Well said. Leela, what do you think?
Well, I think Don is correct. First of all, getting back to the mission or purpose that you told the IRS. The IRS has a very general global purpose statement for you to use. It is so broad that darn near everything you want to do in the public good will fit under that. And as an organization evolves, as long as it fits that overall purpose, then you're fine. You don't have to continue to narrow things down. That's not the point. That's not growth. That's not education of your board, your staff, and the people that you serve. So I just want people to understand, and really, I think the IRS requires that one general purpose statement, because their staff people who were reading all kinds of missions and things and just not understanding what the whole world, all these nonprofits want to do. So they came up with a very workable purpose or mission statement that they'd like you to use. But here again, it's important to do the research. For example, I remember there was a time when Walmart used to request programs from social service agencies because they had some particular interests. And that's the other thing. You know, if you're gonna look to some of the mature nonprofits, then if you're going to have a discussion, you need to have a discussion with someone who has an interest in what you're doing and would like to see that expand.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Or it may be an organization, a mature organization that has thought about something that you're doing, but don't quite know how to do the boots on the ground kind of thing. But here again, let's do our research.
Mhm.
That's where research becomes invaluable. It was a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago now at this point, and it was in Business First. And you can find this type of information where Business First, Columbus is a fantastic city as far as what is give. You know, we've got the big give going on, I think today and tomorrow. But they listed all the foundations in town. And there's a tremendous number of foundations. And they also listed what the foundation's primary interest was.
Mhm.
So if a foundation has a primary interest in animals and you're dealing with a trafficking issue, writing a proposal is kind of a exercise. So you really do the research to find out who is as passionate about what I'm passionate about. Those are the people that you really start to approach.
Mhm. Mhm. This is so good, guys. And I think a lot of what we have shared has put up kind of like yellow and red flags for people like, oh, don't go forward unless you do this. Make sure you've got this in place. So I don't want it to feel so overwhelming because we know there are success stories out there.
Mhm.
Can each of you share where you have helped or been a part of a nonprofit success story in the community?
Yes.
That's a lot of years
Yes.
up to today, but yes.
Yeah. Ms. Boykin, do you want to go first? Or you want me to?
Look,
I don't know if Steve's still on or not.
one of the success stories that I'd like to talk about is a couple who started their own youth league with the purpose of really teaching these young people leadership and developing them through the whole concept of teamwork. They spent 3 years using their own money to build an image, to train the parents, you know, that whole little league kind of attitude, got the parents to help them with that. And after 3 years, they were ready to formalize it. And so we had a lot to work with from that. It was really kind of easy to get their tax exempt status. And now they are partnering with some schools, or before the pandemic came, right? But they are becoming well known among the schools that from middle school up, who have young people who can't make the quote school team,
Mhm.
but they can be on a team with them. And each season they have a different sport, and everybody learns it, you know, and they're not trying to create superstars, but it's to prepare them all for their leadership development camp in the summer. And they're having a lot of success with that. A lot of success with that.
So
Beautiful.
I've
That's
been blessed.
fantastic.
I've
That's
been
fantastic.
blessed to sit with a couple of organizations when the idea was still just a gleam in their eye. And one in particular is a mentoring and leadership program. And year one, it was the person and their friend generating $60,000, just running around doing whatever they could think to do. Year four, we put some structure in places, and they were doing about $500,000, and had some really nice supporters, had some public publicity and things like that. We're year 10 now, and what we're in the process of doing is taking some of these ideas and concepts and spinning them off into separate entities, possibly separate nonprofit entities. Some are actually being spun off into for-profit entities, adult leadership courses. Well, that doesn't have to, if the dollars are being generated through people attending leadership courses, that doesn't have to be a nonprofit. So we're now looking at the entire space of what they're doing after 10 years and spinning some of it out into nonprofit worlds and for-profit worlds. So now that sounds like a tremendous, easy 10-year process. That is not the case. There's been a lot of arguments, a lot of discussion, but everyone, and I've been blessed to be around this team from the beginning. Everyone has a level of respect and honoring of each other and the viewpoint that they bring. So I look at that as probably the biggest success story that I could give you.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
Yep. What about you, Sharon?
Well, I do have the privilege of being with a nonprofit from the starting phase, and this has been, we're talking about now almost 30 years ago.
Don't say that, Sharon,
Yeah, do you believe that?
because I know which one you're talking about, so don't say 30 years.
Oh, my goodness. But yeah, our church formed a nonprofit development corporation to serve the community within the vicinity of the church. And of course, these are church people who were not developers. They were not knowledgeable in this area. And I was given the responsibility of going to training and to try and learn about the industry and just what you can and can't do as a nonprofit. And actually, Steve, I'm hoping that he's still on the call, if he can chime in, because the Ohio CDC Association was a wonderful organization that the city had recommended to us. They provided training. They also provided networking opportunities with other nonprofits. It's a statewide organization. Actually got to serve on their board for a few years back in the early days. But anyway, but that organization provided the initial things that we needed as an organization to get started. And again, you know, this is a faith-based organization. So we were operating in a mission that we felt directed very strongly, you know, by the Lord, and He opened crazy doors for us. So we did enjoy success, especially in those early years as we were getting started. And what was interesting, it's also a cautionary tale too, because with, you know, we had a scope of a strategic plan that involved not only housing development, economic development, education. We did spin off a daycare center that is still functioning. So we're thankful for that, but we also had a community school that operated for 10 years. And then we also branched into the economic development piece, which ended up being a challenge for us. And we had some unfortunate experiences there that almost stopped us in our tracks. But because, of course, as I said, this is a faith-based organization, God has allowed us to sustain, and we're moving forward and actually have opportunities now to restart projects. But one thing that I've learned out of this experience is that your commitment to your vision is important. It's also important that you are not afraid to receive direction and instruction. And because often we're so passionate, you know, you see it a certain way and that's all you see. When there are others that sometimes are put in your way to help guide you. So it's important. That's why I was talking about that board and those support people that are there to help keep you on the path so that you can accomplish what your mission is. We grew so fast, and there were a lot of things and a lot of opportunities that were coming to us that we might not have been ready for at the time, you know. So you got to have someone that is kind of there to kind of keep you, you know, grounded even as you're moving forward with that. But it is still a success story. And I say that, and I can only give God the glory for that, because as I said, it was a vision that he gave us. And so with that confidence, our board is still able to stand because we believe that we will see the fruition of everything that was shown to us to accomplish.
Right. So, you know, the success stories, 3 years, 10 years, 30 years. It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes commitment, it takes passion. You need to be humble, willing to receive feedback,
Yes.
direction. You need to be fluid and adaptable, because being rigid in this world just does not work, especially in the vein of nonprofits. And you need to be intentional in terms of who you're surrounding yourself with, so that you have the right intelligence and the right information at the room when it comes to decision planning. All things that I advise people on in a for-profit world, absolutely. So not altogether different. In my mind, I think a nonprofit is more challenging and harder than a for-profit.
Yes.
So, you know, kind of my 2 cents on that. But, you know, what I want people to walk away from this session with is it is possible. It is in some cases needed, but you need to make sure that you can tell a very, very good story that's compelling. And that starts with your business planning, your mission, your vision. What's your value proposition? What promise are you keeping to your community, your constituents? How are you working to achieve that? So this has been fantastic. I think there's a question in the chat room that we want to address, and I'm gonna let Mr. Wells go ahead and read that question and address it.
Sure. I think we've got a question in the chat room about private foundations versus public charities. And I really appreciate that being a topic and a question. We'll try and be really brief with it, because last night, believe it or not, I was doing some reading on it. And private foundations primarily are structured in such a way that they are funded by a limited number of individuals, generally family members, and the primary function of a private foundation is to give away money to public charity. They're both 501c3s. Private foundations can do some level of programming, but that's not their primary focus. And private foundations, when you hit certain thresholds, pay tax on dollars that were not given away. So you would pay tax on your investment earnings in a given period. Public foundation, public charities are structured in such a way that you can do a wide sweeping giving campaign and gifts and things like that. For instance, I mentioned the Big Give is going on right now. Private foundations are not part of the Big Give. That would not be within their purview, because the funding would come from anyone. And private foundations, generally, those few funders also become the board members. So they're structured just a little bit differently than a public charity. Also, I don't believe that private foundations fall under the purview of the general. So you have some good and some bad in structuring a private foundation. I think it would take a lot of discussion to get down into which route you want to go.
Okay, excellent. There's another question in the chat I'm going to get to. Let's see here. Is the startup steps for a social enterprise and the steps you outline at the start of the webinar for nonprofit?
No.
So a question about social enterprise versus nonprofit.
No, I think that, so the social enterprise would, so generally social enterprise is connected in some way to a nonprofit. So if you're, because there's a new business type out called, I don't think it's called a social enterprise, it's called a social something, the new entity structure. So if you're connecting yourself to a nonprofit, you still need the 1023 step. So the steps are the same except for the 1023, depending on exactly how you're structuring that social enterprise. For instance, if you're structuring it as a LLC and you're asking it to be tax exempt for social purposes, you would not go through the 1023. So the first 2 or 3 steps remain the same. The off-ramp becomes what your communication with the IRS, how you legally structure it. I'm not an attorney. I have to say that because accountants get in trouble for trying to be attorneys.
So let's say I'm a for-profit organization, but I want to do good in the community.
Yep.
Well, how can I organize that? What's that look like, guys?
Actually, it's not so difficult. You know, you can establish a quote nonprofit to do the good as a subsidiary of the for-profit entity. That happens a lot, back and forth. Okay, but remember, separate board. Okay.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Listen, here's my last question, because at MBAC, we are fielding a lot of questions more and more often about, I need to start a nonprofit. How do I get that started? And I've already admitted who I am. I'm a for-profit girl. So I need to know where to send them, guys. Can each of you talk to us about the services you offer to help nonprofit organizations?
All right, and as they do that, I'm actually going to put their contact information up on the screen. So
Yes, absolutely. But if they could speak a little bit about that, that would be helpful. I'm sure everybody's taking notes as well.
Sure. Ms. Boykin?
Yeah, well, my passion is with startups because I have this desire to help startups start correctly and not get into trouble. So in addition to assisting you with doing all the paperwork that's required, I also provide some board development training, and we talk about the skill sets that you need. And we then begin to identify people you know who may have an interest in what you want to do and would be willing to come on and help. So that's my major concern. With existing nonprofits, sometimes they have some issues with board development, and then I will come in and do some of that. I certainly have not had all the most pleasant situations. I've had to help work out some situations in my own work life. And I thought, well, if we would just do things a certain way, we wouldn't run into these problems. So what I'm trying to do is help startups front load from the beginning so they don't get into any kind of governance issues. And with some of the 3 to 5 year old nonprofits that on the governance, and it usually happens on the governance, everything happens on the governance side. Okay, because that board's responsibility is to monitor the activities of that nonprofit on a regular basis. And they're responsible for identifying issues that come up that would negatively impact the operation of the nonprofit. But we do have some boards who think, well, oh, we've got a CEO or an executive director, and that's their job to do it. And it doesn't always work out like that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I just did some quick research to answer the question. The title for the social responsible businesses, what it's called, is a B Corp. So you can create a B Corp if you're looking to create a social responsible business, which is a little bit different than a social enterprise. So there's some off ramps to consider as you go through there. Donald Wells CPA, we are primarily, believe it or not, an audit firm. We do everything from consulting to audits that are sent to the federal government for approval to food organizations. I love to audit. I hate to audit. I love to audit because I know that when I walk into a room of board of directors, I have their attention. So that's what we do. I mean, we're the accounting. We can provide any and every accounting service you can think of. The other two things that I really want to leave you with is I do a podcast called A Different Type of Bean Counter. And what I try to do there is give a voice to some organizations that don't have a voice. And then I also try to give away some free information to keep you clean as far as just accounting rules and things like that. My last one that is released was about affiliate marketing. Getting ready to Monday, I'm going to release probably part one of a chat I had with some folks from the Attorney General's office. So that's going to be fascinating. And then the other thing is just LinkedIn. I put information out 3 times a week just to try and guide nonprofits, and it's free. And that's what I do, is I try to get free information out to help organizations. So the podcast, LinkedIn, and auditing and accounting tools.
Fantastic. Sharon, will you share Stephen's information?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I wish that we were able to hear from him today, but this is his contact information. He has, of course, given us a contact with regard to housing development, because that is their specialty, as well as their home buyer and credit counseling. Let me minimize this window here, so hopefully you all can see that, that information. All righty. Dan Ruggiero is the person that, if you're looking for homebuyer or credit counseling, he would be the person to contact at their main number, which is listed there, an extension 104. And housing development or any those kinds of issues, Steve. And again, he's also active with the Ohio CDC Association. So if you're looking at being able to take advantage of any of the programs that they offer, definitely I would reach out to him, or you could call their number directly. But certainly Steve is knowledgeable, and I'm sure he would be willing to share the benefit of his experience with you. So, and for those who did inquire, we will be sending out the link to this recording so that you will have access to this information. That's the benefit of being attending our seminars. And also through our blog that we send out, we will also publish a link through that so that you can take advantage of it.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank everyone, the presenters, for bringing their very best this morning to share with us, to be open, to be completely transparent, for the attendees, for, you know, hanging in there with us with our technical difficulties. We wanted to, you know, soldier through and make sure we got this information out to you. If you were a little shy in the chat, that's quite all right. You can email us at nbac@cul.org. Any questions that you have, we would love to hear from you about what other type of content you would like for us to bring forward relative to nonprofits or any other business concern. We are here to address those concerns, meet those needs, and make sure you have the information available. I thank everyone. I wish you well, be safe, be healthy, and love one another, guys. We care. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.